The cruel life in the lower levels of Coruscant is a darkness few ever escape. Down here on level 1313, where Imperial light never reaches, we exist rather than live. I know every dripping pipe, every flickering sign, every patrol route of the Black Sun enforcers who truly rule these shadows. For 10 years, I've survived by stripping parts from dead droids and corpses, head down, invisible among billions. I never wanted more than my next meal, until that night, the night a dying Jedi crashed through the ceiling, hunted by an Imperial Inquisitor with eyes like death. As he pressed his lightsaber into my hands, whispering that the knowledge must survive, I became something I never wanted to be: important. What happens when the Empire's most relentless hunters turn their gaze upon someone who has spent a lifetime learning to disappear? The first thing I learned on level 1313 is that up never happens for people like us. Sure, we all know the tales. Some lucky scavenger finds Imperial tech, bribes the right enforcer, buys passage upward, one level at a time until they reach the middle tiers where there are actual windows. But these are just stories we tell ourselves in the crushing dark. No one really escapes the Undercity. The Empire makes certain of that. My name is Jax Moran. 10 years ago, I was a Republic mechanic with certification and quarters on level 1150. Not luxurious by any measure, but there was filtered air and regulated light cycles to mimic day and night. Now I live 163 levels deeper, where the only light comes from flickering neon signs advertising pleasures no one can truly afford, and the occasional blast of fire when the Black Sun enforcers collect their due. The industrial corridors of 1313 smell of burnt circuitry and old coolant. Condensation drips from pipes that have been leaking since before the Clone Wars. The walls here still bear Republic insignias, though most have been covered with Imperial propaganda or gang markings. Down here, the Empire only exists as an abstract threat, a distant power that occasionally sends troopers to remind us who truly rules. The real authority is the Black Sun Syndicate. They control the air processors, the nutrient dispensaries, the limited medical supplies. Cross them, and you might find yourself ejected through a maintenance hatch into the toxic fog that lies another 50 levels down. I survive by stripping parts from discarded droids. Some I find in waste disposal units, others I take from corpses in the aftermath of gang wars. A motivator here, a processing chip there. I make enough to pay my protection fees and occasionally bribe a syndicate member for more valuable salvage locations. It is not living, it is existing. The corridor that leads to my quarters is narrow, the ceiling so low that taller species must stoop. The door to my room bears the marks of at least 3 break-in attempts. Inside, the space is barely large enough for a sleep pallet and a workbench where I repair what I can sell. My tools are laid out with military precision, a habit from my Republic days that I cannot seem to break. The single window in my quarters does not open to the outside but to another corridor. Sometimes I press my face against it just to feel the vibration of footsteps, to remember that there are others out there, alone in the midst of billions. That is life on 1313. Tonight started like any other. I was returning from the cracked motivator, a cantina that serves alcohol strong enough to temporarily blind you, but cheap enough that even scavengers like me can afford it. The Black Sun had instituted another curfew, but I had paid the night patrol enough credits that they would look the other way. Or so I thought. I felt the shift in air pressure first. The corridor suddenly seemed emptier, the usual background noise of machinery and distant voices going quiet. Then I heard it. The distinct sound of Imperial boots, not the clumsy, heavy footfalls of stormtroopers, but something more precise, more deliberate. The sound of someone trained to hunt. I pressed myself into a service alcove, holding my breath as the footsteps grew closer. Through the steam venting from a nearby pipe, I saw a figure in black move past. Not a stormtrooper, something worse. The red glow of an Inquisitorious insignia reflected off the moisture on the walls. An Imperial agent dedicated to hunting down the remaining Jedi. What one was doing this far down was beyond my comprehension. The Jedi were gone, purged years ago when the Republic fell. The Inquisitor paused, head tilting as if listening for something I could not hear. Then it continued down the corridor, the sound of its methodical footsteps fading into the constant mechanical drone of the level. I waited several minutes before emerging from my hiding spot. The curfew suddenly seemed like a minor concern compared to the presence of an Imperial Inquisitor. I needed to get back to my quarters and stay there until whatever was happening blew over, but fate has never been kind to those of us who dwell in the lower levels. I had barely taken 10 steps when I heard the crash. Something massive had impacted nearby. The sound of metal tearing and structural supports groaning under sudden stress. My first instinct was to run the other way. In 1313, unusual events rarely brought good fortune. But curiosity, that fatal flaw that has brought me both my greatest findings and worst troubles, pulled me toward the source of the commotion. Through a maze of maintenance tunnels and residential corridors, I followed the sounds of commotion. Other denizens of the level peered cautiously from behind locked doors, but none ventured out. When I reached a junction that opened onto one of the wider thoroughfares, I understood why. A ship had crashed through the ceiling, taking out several levels of infrastructure before coming to rest in what had once been a public refresher station. It was not large, perhaps a 2-person shuttle, its hull scorched from weapons fire. The canopy was cracked but intact, and through it, I could make out a single occupant, unmoving in the pilot seat. I approached cautiously, checking for signs of fuel leakage or other hazards. The ship was of an unfamiliar design, sleeker than most vessels that made it down to our level. As I drew closer, the canopy suddenly hissed open, startling me backward. The pilot inside was a human male, perhaps in his 40s, though it was difficult to tell through the blood that covered half his face. He wore simple brown robes, now darkened with blood and soot. His eyes flickered open, focusing on me with alarming clarity for someone who appeared so grievously injured. With effort, he raised his hand, revealing what he held: a lightsaber. Not activated, but unmistakable in its design. A Jedi. Here, on level 1313, and somewhere nearby, an Imperial Inquisitor hunting him. The Jedi's lips moved, forming words I could not hear over the hissing of damaged systems and the distant wail of security alarms. I leaned closer, against my better judgment. "Take it," he whispered, pushing the lightsaber toward me with trembling hands. "They cannot find it. The knowledge inside must survive." Before I could ask what he meant, his body went rigid, his eyes fixed on something behind me. I turned to find 3 stormtroopers advancing, blaster rifles raised. Behind them, the dark figure of the Inquisitor approached, a circular lightsaber hilt in hand. "Step away from the traitor," the Inquisitor commanded, voice distorted through a vocoder. I did as instructed, slowly backing away from the crashed ship. The Jedi's lightsaber was still in my hand, partially concealed by my sleeve. I should have dropped it, should have kicked it away, and denied any connection to the wounded man. But some impulse, some madness born of years living in oppression, made me slip it into the hidden pocket of my jacket. The stormtroopers reached the ship, 2 training their weapons on the Jedi while the 3rd roughly pulled him from the cockpit. The Jedi offered no resistance, his body limp. For a moment, I thought he might already be dead. Then his eyes found mine again, a silent communication passing between us, a plea, a burden transferred. The Inquisitor approached, ignoring me completely, focus entirely on the captured Jedi. I remained frozen, certain that at any moment I would be searched, the lightsaber discovered, my life forfeit. But the Imperials seemed to view me as nothing more than another piece of the landscape, a scavenger of no consequence. "Secure the ship," the Inquisitor ordered. "Search for any artifacts or communications devices." As the stormtroopers busied themselves with the vessel, the Inquisitor knelt beside the Jedi, who had been dropped unceremoniously to the ground. I could not hear what was said, but the Jedi suddenly convulsed, his back arching in pain as the Inquisitor held a hand near his temple. Some use of the Force, I presumed, though my knowledge of such things came only from propaganda broadcasts and cantina rumors. I should have left then, should have melted away into the labyrinth of 1313 and forgotten everything I had seen. The lightsaber in my pocket felt impossibly heavy, as if its weight might drag me through the floor to the levels below. But I remained, watching as the Jedi was pulled to his feet, his hands bound behind him. The Inquisitor turned, and though I could not see a face behind the mask, I felt the weight of that gaze fall upon me. My heart seemed to stop, my lungs unable to draw breath. "You," the distorted voice said, a gloved hand rising to point at me. "What did he give you?" "I am not brave. I have never claimed to be. I have survived in the Undercity by knowing when to run, when to hide, when to bribe, and when to submit." Confronted by an agent of the Empire with the power of life and death, the sensible response would have been immediate surrender. But something about the Jedi's plea, about the weight of the weapon in my pocket, made me do the most foolish thing possible. I ran. The first blaster bolt missed me by centimeters, striking the wall beside my head and showering me with superheated fragments of duracrete. The second shot I did not see, but heard impact somewhere behind me as I threw myself around a corner. Shouts echoed through the corridors, the stormtroopers in pursuit, while the Inquisitor remained with their prisoner. Level 1313 may be a prison, but it is a prison I know intimately. Every maintenance tunnel, every service corridor, every forgotten access hatch. I fled through spaces too narrow for armored troopers, taking turns at random to confuse any attempt at prediction. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, but I did not slow. The Inquisitor would not give up so easily. Whatever the Jedi had entrusted me with, the Empire wanted it badly enough to send their specialized hunters. I did not go to my quarters. That would be the first place they would look once they accessed the level registry. Instead, I made my way to one of the abandoned processing plants that had once filtered water for the levels above. The machinery still hummed with residual power, creating a background noise that would mask my presence from casual searchers. Only when I was certain I had not been followed did I examine what the Jedi had given me. The lightsaber was heavier than it looked, its metal casing worn but meticulously maintained. I knew better than to activate it in such a confined space, but curiosity compelled me to examine it more closely. The base of the hilt could be unscrewed, I discovered. Inside was not the power cell or kyber crystal I had expected, but a small data chip, no larger than my thumbnail. The knowledge inside must survive, the Jedi had said, not the weapon itself, but what it contained. As I stared at the tiny chip in my palm, I realized that my life as I knew it was over. The Empire would tear 1313 apart looking for me. The Black Sun would offer me no protection, not against Imperial forces. I had become a marked man simply by being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or perhaps the right place at the right time. I had no love for the Empire, had watched it slowly squeeze the lower levels, making a hard existence nearly impossible. If this data was important enough for a Jedi to die protecting it, perhaps it was worth the risk. I resealed the lightsaber, ensuring the data chip was secure inside, then tucked it back into my hidden pocket. I would need help to escape 1313 to evade both the Empire and the Syndicate. There was only one person I could think of who might be willing and able to assist, though approaching her carried its own dangers. Lyra Vost had once been a slicing prodigy on the mid-levels, capable of breaking almost any security system. Now she survived on 1313 by selling information and access codes to whoever could pay. She owed me for keeping quiet about her involvement in a Black Sun data breach last cycle. It was time to call in that debt. Finding Lyra would not be easy. She moved her operation regularly to avoid Syndicate enforcers and Imperial surveillance. But in the Undercity, information was a commodity like any other, and I still had enough credits for one more bribe. As I crept through the shadows of level 1313, the constant mechanical drone that had been the soundtrack to my life for the past decade seemed to take on a new rhythm. The hum of power conduits and the hiss of steam vents formed a whispered warning. The Empire is coming. The Empire is coming, and this time they would not be satisfied until they found what they sought. I had spent years keeping my head down, avoiding notice, surviving one day to the next without aspiration or hope. Now I carried a dead Jedi's legacy in my pocket and the attention of the most dangerous force in the galaxy on my shoulders. For the first time since I had been relegated to the First Force, lower levels, I felt something stirring inside me that I had long thought dead. Not hope, precisely. Just a sense that my existence might have purpose beyond mere survival. Whatever knowledge the data chip contained, it had been worth a Jedi's life. It would likely cost me mine as well, but perhaps that was a price worth paying. In a galaxy where the light of the Republic had been extinguished, where the Empire's shadow stretched across countless worlds, even the smallest spark of resistance might matter. And if nothing else, I would die for something more meaningful than a failed protection payment or a dispute over salvage rights. With that thought providing cold comfort, I disappeared into the endless maze of level 1313, a reluctant courier carrying a burden I did not understand but could not abandon. The informant broker operated out of an old maintenance substation near the border between Black Sun and Crimson Dawn territory. The location was strategic, allowing her to deal with clients from either syndicate while maintaining a precarious neutrality. I approached cautiously, taking a circuitous route through service tunnels and abandoned residential blocks to ensure I wasn't followed. The entrance to her operation was disguised as a malfunctioning waste disposal unit. I pressed the access panel in the specific sequence I had paid a street vendor to reveal, an expensive 5 digits that bought me potential salvation or confirmed my destruction. The panel slid aside, revealing a narrow passage illuminated by strips of mismatched lighting. At the far end, automated security measures scanned me for weapons and tracking devices. I wondered if the system would register the lightsaber as a weapon, but apparently its dormant state allowed it to pass undetected. Lyra Vost had changed since I last saw her. The left side of her face bore fresh implants, metallic components that interfaced directly with her skull. Her right eye had been replaced with a cybernetic version that whirred softly as it adjusted focus. She sat behind a desk constructed from salvaged starship components, surrounded by display screens showing security feeds from throughout the surrounding sectors. "Jax Moran," she said, her voice carrying the slight metallic resonance common to those with vocal modulator implants. "I calculated a 17% probability you would seek me out today. The Imperial presence on our level has increased by 34% in the past 6 hours." I had always found her manner of speaking unsettling, as if she were reading data rather than engaging in conversation. But her analytical mind and technological enhancements made her the most effective information broker in the lower levels. "I need transport off 1313, I said, seeing no benefit in prevarication. "Immediately and discreetly." Her cybernetic eye spun, focusing tightly on my face. "The statistical likelihood of successful departure from level 1313 during an Imperial lockdown is approximately 3.2%. May I inquire as to why you would attempt such an improbable escape?" I weighed my options carefully. Lyra dealt in information, and the more valuable the information I provided, the more likely she would be to help me. But revealing too much about the lightsaber or its contents could put us both in greater danger. "I witnessed the capture of a Jedi," I said finally. "The Imperials believe he passed something to me." Her organic eye widened slightly, the only indication of surprise on her otherwise impassive face. "A genuine Jedi? Fascinating. The existence of surviving Jedi has been rumored but unconfirmed in my data networks. He crashed a ship through the ceiling near Sector 9. An Inquisitor took him into custody." Lyra's fingers moved rapidly across her console, pulling up security feeds and what appeared to be Imperial communications intercepts. "Confirmed. Imperial chatter indicates the capture of a high-value fugitive. They are conducting a level-wide search for a secondary target." She looked up at me. "That would be you, I presume." I nodded, fighting the urge to check my pocket for the lightsaber. Lyra missed nothing, and any unusual behavior would only increase her curiosity. "The Jedi passed nothing to you?" she asked, her tone making it clear she knew I was withholding information. "Nothing of value to you," I replied carefully. She studied me for a long moment, calculations visibly running behind her eyes. "Incorrect. Everything is of potential value to me. However, I acknowledge your right to privacy. My assistance will simply be more costly as a result." This was the negotiation I had expected. "I can pay 2,000 credits now. Another 3,000 when we reach the mid-levels." "Insufficient," she said without hesitation. "Current market value for illegal transit to mid-levels is 7,000 credits base rate. Imperial interest in the passenger increases the rate by a factor of 3. Your total would be 21,000 credits. It was an impossible sum, more than I could hope to earn in years of salvage work. I don't have that kind of money." "Obviously." She leaned forward slightly. "However, alternative forms of payment exist. Information, for example, has variable but potentially significant value." And there it was, the real negotiation. What information would offset the cost? Her organic eye blinked once, slowly. "The nature of what the Jedi entrusted to you. The reason for Imperial interest beyond the capture of a fugitive." I hesitated. Telling her about the data chip might put her in danger, but without her help, I had no hope of escaping 1,313. The Empire would find me eventually, and the information would be lost regardless. "A data chip," I admitted finally. "I don't know what information it contains. The Jedi only said the knowledge must survive." Lyra's posture changed subtly, a slight straightening that indicated increased interest. "Jedi knowledge has extreme rarity value. Historical records, force techniques, or operational data regarding surviving Jedi would all command premium rates in certain markets." "I don't intend to sell it," I said, perhaps too quickly. "Whatever it contains, it was worth a man's life." "Sentiment," she observed, not critically but as if noting an unexpected variable in a calculation. "Inefficient but occasionally predictive of high-value outcomes." "Very well. I will arrange transport to level 900 inches exchange for exclusive right to copy the data before you proceed with whatever mission you have assigned yourself." It was a better offer than I had expected, but still problematic. "How do I know you won't simply take the data and sell me out to the Empire?" "Risk assessment," she replied promptly. "Imperial payment for your capture would be substantial but one time. The potential value of an ongoing business relationship with someone carrying Jedi artifacts presents greater long-term profit potential. Additionally, my reputation as a neutral information broker depends on client confidentiality. Betrayal would damage my business model irreparably." Her logic was cold but sound. In the Undercity, profit motive was often the only reliable guarantee of behavior. "When can we leave?" "Preparations will require approximately 3 hours. Imperial patrol patterns suggest an optimal departure window at 0300 hours. She gestured to a door behind her. "You may utilize my secure waiting area until then. It is shielded against scanning technology and has independent life support if this sector is subjected to lockdown gas." It was as good an offer as I could hope for. I nodded my agreement and followed her gesture to the small room beyond. It contained little more than a bench and a water dispenser, but it was more secure than anywhere else available to me. As the door closed behind me, I finally allowed myself to check that the lightsaber was still secure in my pocket. The weight of it was reassuring in a strange way. For the first time in years, my actions mattered beyond my immediate survival. Whatever information the data chip contained, it represented something the Empire feared, and anything the Empire feared might be valuable to those who would oppose it. I sat on the hard bench, back against the wall, and prepared for a long wait. The constant background noise of level 1313 was muted here, replaced by the soft hum of Lyra's equipment and the barely perceptible sound of air cycling through filtration systems. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to consider what would happen if I actually succeeded in escaping the lower levels. After a decade of existence defined by rigid boundaries, the sudden prospect of freedom was almost as terrifying as Imperial pursuit. Where would I go? Who would I trust with information valuable enough for the Empire to hunt me across the galaxy? I had no contacts beyond 1313, no allies in the larger world. And yet, for the first time in years, I felt a sense of purpose. The Jedi had chosen me, whether by design or desperate chance. I would not waste this opportunity, whatever the personal cost. 3 hours, then a journey upward, toward levels I had not seen in a decade, toward greater danger, but also toward the faint possibility of making a difference in a galaxy crushed beneath Imperial rule. I opened my eyes and waited for Lyra's return, the lightsaber a constant presence against my side, its weight a reminder of both burden and possibility. The passage upward began in a service lift that had not been used in decades. Lyra led me through a series of maintenance tunnels to reach it, her movements precise and economical. She had replaced her distinctive cybernetic components with more subdued versions, reducing the likelihood of identification. I followed closely, constantly checking over my shoulder despite her assurance that we were avoiding all surveillance coverage. This lift was decommissioned during the Republic era, she explained as she bypassed the security lockout on the control panel. It no longer appears in Imperial infrastructure records, but maintains an operational connection to the central power grid. We can ascend approximately 300 levels before we must transfer to alternative transport. The lift itself was little more than a metal platform with safety rails, designed for maintenance droids rather than organic passengers. As power surged through long dormant systems, the platform shuddered alarmingly. 76% probability of successful ascent without catastrophic mechanical failure, Lyra noted, apparently finding those odds acceptable. The journey upward was both faster and more terrifying than I had anticipated. The lift moved at speeds it had never been designed to achieve, Lyra's modifications pushing ancient machinery beyond safety parameters. We passed through level after level of infrastructure, occasional glimpses of corridors and habitation zones visible through gaps in the shaft walls. I had forgotten how stratified Coruscant truly was. Level 1313 represented a particular circle of urban hell, but each level we passed showed variation in conditions. Some appeared abandoned, others showed signs of overcrowding. Occasionally we passed military checkpoints that Lyra's route carefully avoided, stormtroopers visible at security stations monitoring the more official passages between levels. After nearly an hour of ascent, the lift slowed and stopped at what Lyra identified as level 1027. Transition point, she said tersely, gesturing for me to follow her onto a narrow maintenance walkway. The air here smelled different, less of industrial waste and more of processed foodstuffs and the distinctive tang of cleaning solvents. We moved through the infrastructure of a massive food processing plant, the machinery operating at minimal capacity during what I presumed was the night cycle. Automated systems sorted, packaged, and prepared for distribution the nutritional products that would feed billions on the levels above and below. Commercial facilities provide optimal transit conditions, Lyra explained as we navigated between conveyor systems. Multiple entry and exit points, minimal organic personnel, standardized security protocols that remain consistent despite regime changes. We emerged into a loading bay where cargo speeders were being filled with packaged goods by loader droids. Lyra approached one of the vehicles, interfacing briefly with its security system before gesturing for me to climb aboard. We concealed ourselves in the cargo compartment, hidden among crates of synthetic protein bars destined for mid-level distribution centers. The speeder joined a convoy, moving through a transit tunnel large enough to accommodate industrial transport. For the first time since beginning our journey, I felt exposed. Imperial checkpoints were visible at intervals along the route, though our vehicle passed through with only cursory scanning. The driver is an asset, Lyra whispered, noting my concern. Paid to transport various cargoes without official inspection. Success rate 97.3% over 3 standard years of operation. I wanted to ask about the remaining 2.7%, but decided the information would not be comforting. Instead, I focused on remaining still and silent as we continued our journey upward. After what seemed an eternity of tense waiting, the speeder docked at another loading facility. Lyra indicated it was time to move. We slipped from the cargo hold during a momentary gap in the loading droid's patrol pattern and made our way to a service corridor. Level 904, she announced. Central distribution hub for mid-level sectors 17 through 29. Our agreement specified transport to level 900. We have exceeded contractual obligations by 4 levels. The corridor we stood in was clean and well lit, a shocking contrast to the perpetual gloom of 1313. The air tasted different, filtered more thoroughly and lacking the metallic tang of industrial pollutants that I had grown so accustomed to. Even the ambient sound was different, the mechanical drone less oppressive, interspersed with the distant sounds of genuine commerce and civilian life. We require a secure location for data transfer, Lyra continued, already moving toward what appeared to be an unused office space. Inside, she quickly disabled the surveillance systems and established a secure perimeter using devices from her pack. The lightsaber, she said, extending her hand once the security measures were in place. The data chip, specifically. I hesitated, my hand closing protectively around the weapon in my pocket. Despite knowing this moment would come, I felt a sudden reluctance to surrender the Jedi's final trust. A copy only, I insisted, as agreed. She nodded once, impatient but acknowledging the terms. I carefully unscrewed the base of the hilt and removed the tiny data chip, placing it in her outstretched palm while maintaining my grip on the lightsaber itself. Lyra inserted the chip into a specialized reader she produced from her collection of technology. For several minutes she worked in silence, her expression growing increasingly intent as she processed the information. Unexpected, she said finally, her organic eye widening slightly. The data is encoded using Jedi encryption protocols not documented in any accessible archive. Decryption will require specialized knowledge or technology beyond my current resources. You can't access it? I asked, surprised and somewhat relieved. Negative. The encryption is elegant. Multiple layered authentication sequences requiring specific Force-sensitive interaction or legacy Jedi security protocols. She removed the chip from her reader and handed it back to me. Copying was successful, but practical utilization of the data will require additional resources. I returned, the chip to its hiding place within the lightsaber, screwing the base shut with careful precision. You still got what you wanted. A copy of rare Jedi data. Potential value remains high despite current inaccessibility, she agreed. Knowledge that the Empire cannot access such data is itself valuable to certain clients. Our transaction is complete. She began packing her equipment, movements efficient and practiced. What happens now? I asked, suddenly aware that I had planned only as far as escaping level 1313. The broader question of what to do with the information, how to honor the Jedi's dying wish that it survive, remained unanswered. Lyra paused, her cybernetic eye focusing on me with uncomfortable intensity. You require guidance regarding optimal utilization of the data. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. 2 primary options exist with statistically significant chances of success, she said after a moment of calculation. First, locate a surviving Jedi or Force-sensitive individual capable of accessing the encrypted data. Probability of successful location, less than 7%. Risk of Imperial interception during search, approximately 73%. Neither statistic was encouraging. And the second option? Identify and contact elements of organized resistance to Imperial rule. Multiple fragmented groups exist, operating with varying degrees of coordination. Some possess resources and expertise from the former Republic. Probability of locating such a group, approximately 22%. Risk of Imperial interception or encountering fraudulent resistance cells, 65%. Still poor odds, but marginally better than the first option. Do you have contacts among these resistance groups? Limited, she admitted. My business model requires neutrality. Excessive alignment with anti-imperial forces would compromise my operational security. She hesitated, then added, however, I can provide a specific location where information brokers with confirmed resistance connections operate. Level 1456, Sector 12, Commerce Zone 7. A facility designated the Broken Hyperdrive. It was more help than I had expected. Thank you. Do not interpret this as altruism, she said, her tone flat. Future business opportunities are maximized by your survival and successful delivery of valuable data to parties opposed to imperial dominance. Simple probability calculation. Despite her clinical explanation, I sensed something more behind her assistance. Perhaps even in the Undercity, with its brutal calculus of survival, some small ember of resistance to tyranny remained. Our business is concluded, Lyra continued, moving toward the door. I will exit first and proceed in a direction opposite to your intended route to minimize association. Wait approximately 7 minutes before departing. I nodded, but as she reached the door I spoke again. The Jedi. When they captured him, he seemed to be protecting something more than just the data chip. He suffered rather than reveal information to the Inquisitor. Lyra paused, considering this. Jedi were known to protect various assets, knowledge repositories, Force-sensitive children, artifacts of significance. The specific nature of what your Jedi protected beyond the data chip is indeterminate without additional information. With that final assessment, she left, the door closing silently behind her. I waited the prescribed 7 minutes, using the time to reorient myself to my new surroundings. Level 904 was as alien to me now as level 1313 had been when I was first relegated there. The relative cleanliness, the functional infrastructure, the absence of visible decay, all served to emphasize how far I had fallen and how far I still needed to go. When the time had elapsed, I left the office and made my way cautiously through corridors that grew increasingly populated as the level's day cycle apparently began. The civilians around me wore clothes that, while not luxurious, were intact and clean. They moved with purpose rather than the furtive scurrying common to 1313's inhabitants. Many carried datapads or small communication devices, signs of a technological access unimaginable in the lower levels. I was acutely aware of how out of place I must appear. My clothes were patched and stained, my face bearing the gaunt look of lower-level malnutrition despite my best efforts to maintain my health. I kept my head down, avoiding direct eye contact, using techniques developed for avoiding syndicate notice to now avoid civilian attention. The broken hyperdrive was located nearly 600 levels above me, in an area I had no immediate means of reaching. I would need credits, different clothes, and a less conspicuous appearance before attempting to travel further upward, which meant finding work of some kind, leveraging the mechanical skills that had atrophied but not disappeared during my years of scavenging. As I considered my options, a public information terminal caught my eye. I approached it cautiously, aware that such systems often logged user interactions. But the risk seemed worth the potential intelligence gathering. I needed to understand the current state of mid-level Coruscant, the regulations and opportunities that might exist. The screen illuminated at my proximity, displaying the Imperial logo before transitioning to a public information interface. The first headline made my blood run cold. Imperial Alert. Dangerous fugitive sought, all citizens required to report sightings, level-wide search protocols activated. Below the text was my face, captured from some surveillance system during my escape from 1313. The image was grainy but recognizable, listed alongside a substantial reward for information leading to my capture. I backed away from the terminal, fighting the urge to run. Running would only draw attention. Instead, I forced myself to walk calmly toward the nearest public refresher, a location where I might momentarily escape observation and collect my thoughts. The reality of my situation was stark. The Empire had not contained their search to level 1313. They had extended it upward, distributing my image across multiple levels. Whatever the data chip contained, it was valuable enough to trigger a manhunt of considerable scale. In the relative privacy of the refresher, I examined my reflection in a scratched metal surface that served as a mirror. I needed to change my appearance, and quickly. My hair could be cut, my distinctive mechanic's jacket discarded, but the gaunt face and haunted eyes of a lower-level dweller would be harder to disguise. As I contemplated my limited options, I heard the refresher door open. 2 pairs of boots, moving with the precise rhythm I had come to associate with Imperial forces. I pressed myself into a maintenance alcove, praying to whatever entities might listen that they were simply using the facilities rather than conducting a search. "Waste of time," one voice said, the distinctive modulation identifying the speaker as a stormtrooper. Like he'd make it this far up. "Orders are orders," the second trooper replied. "Every level from 1300 up gets swept. Whatever he took from that Jedi has the brass spooked." "You see the interrogation results?" Heard the Jedi lasted about 5 minutes before the Inquisitor cracked him open. My heart seemed to stop. The Jedi had been broken. Did that mean they knew about the data chip? About me specifically rather than just a suspicious figure seen with the Jedi? "Said something about a map," the first trooper continued. "Star systems beyond the outer rim. Places the Empire has never charted. Worlds to hide on," the second trooper surmised. "Probably where the rest of those traitors disappeared to after the purge." Their conversation continued as they used the facilities, but I was no longer listening with the same intensity. A map. The data chip contained coordinates to locations beyond. Imperial reach. Places where surviving Jedi might have sought refuge. No wonder the Empire was so determined to recover it. The troopers finished their business and left, their conversation shifting to more mundane complaints about duty rotations. I remained in the alcove for several minutes after their departure, processing this new information. The scale of what I carried had just expanded dramatically. Not merely important data, but potentially the key to finding the remaining Jedi, scattered across uncharted regions of the galaxy. I needed to change my appearance and continue upward. The broken hyperdrive and its resistance contacts seemed even more crucial now. But first, I needed credits and different clothes. My mechanical skills were my only marketable asset, but attempting to find legitimate work while my face circulated on Imperial alerts seemed suicidal. As I cautiously exited the refresher, a commotion caught my attention. A small maintenance droid was struggling with an access panel, its manipulator arms unable to reach the recessed reset switch that would open the sealed door. A frustrated courier stood nearby, clearly late for a delivery due to the malfunction. Opportunity rarely announces itself clearly. More often it appears as a small moment where preparation meets circumstance. My years as a Republic mechanic had included endless maintenance on similar systems. "I can fix that," I said, approaching with my head slightly down to avoid direct eye contact that might trigger recognition. The courier looked me over skeptically. "You a maintenance worker?" "Former Republic Engineering Corps," I replied, offering a partial truth that explained my lower-level appearance without raising immediate suspicion. "Fell on hard times after the transition. I can get your door open in 2 minutes." The courier hesitated, then gestured toward the panel. "Make it quick. That package is already late for an Imperial administrative office." I knelt beside the panel, using my body to shield my actions from casual observation. The system was a standard Republic-era design, unchanged despite the regime shift. The reset switch had simply been installed too far back for the maintenance droid's limited reach. I used a thin tool from my pocket to trigger the mechanism, and the door slid open with a satisfying hiss. "There you go," I said, straightening up but keeping my face averted from the courier. To my surprise, the courier pressed a credit chip into my hand. "Thanks. You saved me a reprimand." He hesitated, then added, "If you're looking for work, my transport company is short on maintenance techs. Pay is decent, no questions asked about background. Lot of former Republic personnel ended up in private sector after the changeover." The offer was unexpected but potentially invaluable. A legitimate job would provide credits, cover, and potentially access to transport systems that could move me further upward. The risk of exposure was substantial, but no greater than wandering the mid-levels without resources or direction. "Where do I apply?" I asked, careful to maintain casual interest rather than desperate eagerness. The courier provided an address in a nearby commercial sector, along with a reference code that would bypass the standard application process. "Tell them Dav sent you. Shift starts in 3 hours if you want immediate work." I thanked him and moved away, the credit chip clutched tightly in my hand. It wasn't much, barely enough for a meal and perhaps a used garment to replace my distinctive jacket, but it represented the first step toward establishing a workable cover. In a second-hand clothing shop, I selected a nondescript technician's uniform in muted gray, similar to what thousands of maintenance workers wore across the mid-levels. I used a public refresher to change, discarding my old jacket but carefully transferring the lightsaber to a hidden pocket. I quickly adapted in the new uniform. A quick trim of my hair, using a multi-purpose tool from my belt, completed the basic transformation. I would never pass close inspection, but might avoid casual identification from the grainy images on the Imperial alert. The transport company occupied a moderate-sized facility in a commercial zone dominated by shipping and logistics operations. The reference code from the courier bypassed several layers of security questioning, and I found myself undergoing a cursory skills assessment rather than a detailed background check. The supervisor, a battle-scarred Duros with prosthetic arm replacements, seemed uninterested in my history. "We need someone who can maintain repulsor lift systems on Class 3 urban transports. Can you handle that?" I nodded, the familiar terminology triggering memories of my Republic service. I served on maintenance crews for military transports during the Clone Wars. The civilian models are similar but less complex. The Duros made a sound that might have been approval or merely acknowledgement. Shift runs 10 hours, standard Imperial labor regulations. Pay is 7 credits per hour, dispersed daily. No benefits, no questions about background, no tolerance for theft or substance abuse. Clear? It was a better offer than I could have hoped for. Clear, start immediately. Bay 3 needs a full repulsor lift calibration. Tools are in the maintenance locker. Security code is 47291. Just like that, I had legitimate employment, access to a transport facility, and the beginning of a cover identity. The galaxy had not been so generous to me in a very long time, which naturally made me suspicious, but necessity overrode caution. I needed this position, at least temporarily, if I was to have any hope of reaching level 1456 and the broken hyperdrive. The work itself was almost comforting in its familiarity. Repulsor lift systems had changed little over the years, and the muscle memory of adjustments and calibrations returned quickly. For hours, I lost myself in the methodical process, almost able to forget that I was a fugitive carrying information that might shift the balance of power in the galaxy. Almost. As I completed my assigned tasks, I maintained peripheral awareness of the facility's operations. The company primarily handled mid-level commercial deliveries, but occasionally processed shipments bound for upper levels. More importantly, employee uniforms and identification granted access to various secure transport tunnels that bypassed standard Imperial checkpoints. By the end of my shift, I had earned 70 credits and gained valuable intelligence about possible routes upward. The supervisor seemed satisfied with my work, authorizing a second shift 2 days later without comment or question. I found modest accommodations in a communal housing block that required no identification, merely daily payment. The room was barely larger than a storage closet, but compared to my quarters on level 1313, it was luxurious. Clean water, functional environmental controls, and minimal vermin activity represented significant upgrades to my living conditions. As I lay on the narrow sleep platform, the lightsaber concealed beneath it, I contemplated my next moves. The transport company might eventually provide a way to reach level 1456, but the process would be slow and methodical to avoid detection. Meanwhile, the Empire continued its hunt, potentially narrowing the search with each passing day. The Jedi had broken under interrogation, revealing that the data contained coordinates to systems beyond Imperial reach. But had he revealed my identity? The fact that Imperial alerts showed my image, but no name suggested not. Perhaps he had died before giving them that final piece of information, or perhaps he had never known my name to begin with. Sleep came reluctantly that night, my dreams filled with images of the dying Jedi and the implacable Inquisitor who hunted me. In these nightmares, I found myself running through endless corridors that spiraled ever downward, back to the crushing darkness of level 1313 and below. Each time I woke, gasping and disoriented, the weight of the lightsaber beneath my sleep platform reminded me of both my burden and my purpose. For the first time in years, my existence had meaning beyond mere survival. The knowledge entrusted to me could help what remained of the Jedi Order, could preserve a legacy of knowledge that the Empire seemed determined to eradicate from the galaxy. Whether I had sought this responsibility or not was irrelevant now. I had accepted it when I took the lightsaber and ran. In the artificial dawn of mid-level Coruscant, I prepared for another day of careful advancement, one step at a time, toward a destination I could barely imagine and allies I could only hope existed. The Empire's shadow stretched across the galaxy, but even shadows had edges. Somewhere beyond them, if the data chip was to be believed, lay systems untouched by Imperial dominion. Places where the light might still exist, however faintly. Until I could reach those who might use the knowledge I carried, my only option was continued movement, careful concealment, and the patient accumulation of resources that might eventually enable my escape from Coruscant entirely. The journey would be measured not in days but in careful, methodical steps, each one carrying me further from the lower levels and closer to whatever fate awaited me among the stars. 7 standard days passed in a routine that offered both security and mounting anxiety. My position at the transport company provided steady income and a believable cover identity. I had been assigned a permanent employee identification code that granted access to moderate security areas and transport tunnels. To casual observers, I was simply another anonymous worker in the vast machinery of Coruscant's commercial infrastructure, but Imperial presence throughout the mid-levels had increased noticeably. Patrol patterns intensified, with random identity checks becoming more frequent in public areas. Propaganda broadcasts regularly featured alerts about suspected Jedi sympathizers and the dangers they posed to public safety. My grainy image still appeared occasionally, though with decreasing prominence as newer security concerns took precedence. During my shifts at the transport facility, I carefully mapped potential routes upward, identifying which shipments traveled to higher levels and which security protocols might be vulnerable to exploitation. The company occasionally serviced locations as high as level 1600, though such deliveries required additional clearances and often Imperial escort. On the 8th day, opportunity presented itself in an unexpected form. A shipment of specialized environmental control components was scheduled for delivery to a government facility on level 1500. The manifest indicated these were high-priority replacement parts for systems that regulated atmospheric conditions in an Imperial administrative complex. The Duros supervisor assigned me to the maintenance team preparing the transport for this special delivery. "This one needs perfect calibration," he instructed, his tone conveying the importance of the assignment. Imperial facility means Imperial inspection. Any deviation from performance parameters will trigger a full security scan. I nodded, understanding both the stated concern and the implied warning. This was not merely a technical challenge but a test of my reliability. Performing well might grant me access to higher-level delivery routes, but any suspicion could bring unwanted scrutiny. I worked meticulously on the transport systems, ensuring that every component functioned within optimal parameters. The repulsor lift calibration was particularly critical, as Imperial facilities often employed harmonic resonance scanners that could detect the subtle vibration patterns of improperly maintained systems. As I completed the final adjustments, the Duro's supervisor observed silently. When I finished, he performed his own diagnostic check, his expression unreadable as he reviewed the results. "Acceptable," he said finally, which I had learned was his highest form of praise. "You will accompany the shipment as maintenance support. If any system fluctuations occur during transit, you will address them immediately. Imperial facilities do not tolerate delays." The assignment was precisely what I had been working toward, a legitimate reason to travel to higher levels without arousing suspicion. Level 1,500 was significantly closer to my target of level 1,456 than my current position. Once there, finding a way down 44 levels would be considerably easier than navigating upward nearly 600. The transport departed early the next morning, with a crew consisting of a pilot, 2 loading specialists, and myself as maintenance support. We passed through multiple security checkpoints, each more stringent than the last as we ascended. My employee identification was scanned repeatedly, but the transport company's security protocols and Imperial contracts provided sufficient clearance to proceed. The difference between levels became increasingly pronounced as we rose. Level 1,200 featured the first natural light I had seen in a decade, filtered through atmospheric processes, but unmistakably real sunlight entering through transparent ceiling panels. By level 1400, architectural styles shifted noticeably, with wider corridors, decorative elements, and public spaces featuring actual plant life in carefully maintained planters. At each transition point, I fought to maintain professional disinterest while absorbing every detail. The knowledge might prove crucial for my eventual descent to the broken hyperdrive. More importantly, these observations represented my first glimpse of a world beyond the oppressive confines of the lower levels in years. Despite the danger of my situation, I found myself experiencing an emotion I had nearly forgotten: wonder. We reached level 1,500 after nearly 3 hours of ascent through increasingly restricted zones. The Imperial administrative complex dominated an entire sector, its architecture distinctively Imperial in its angular severity and monolithic scale. The landing platform assigned for our delivery was staffed by stormtroopers and security droids, their presence a reminder of the risk inherent in my subterfuge. As the loading specialists transferred the environmental components to Imperial maintenance droids, I remained with the transport, monitoring systems, and maintaining a posture of professional detachment. An Imperial officer supervised the transfer, comparing the delivered components against the manifest with methodical precision. "Maintenance crew," the officer called, gesturing for me to approach. "These components require calibration verification before installation. You will accompany the installation team to confirm compatibility with existing systems." I hesitated, caught between opportunity and danger. Entering the Imperial facility would bring me into closer proximity to those hunting me, but refusing would immediately trigger suspicion. "Yes, sir," I replied, adopting the deferential tone appropriate for addressing Imperial authority. "I have the calibration specifications prepared." The officer nodded curtly and gestured for me to follow a group of Imperial technicians entering the facility. I sent a brief communication to the transport pilot, indicating that I had been temporarily reassigned to assist with installation. The pilot acknowledged without interest, concerned only that the delay would not affect subsequent delivery schedules. Inside the Imperial complex, security measures intensified, Identity scanners, weapons detectors, and surveillance systems monitored every corridor. I maintained a careful focus on the technical aspects of my temporary assignment, avoiding eye contact with security personnel and responding only when directly addressed by the installation team leader. The Environmental Control Center was located deep within the facility, a massive chamber filled with processing units that regulated atmospheric composition, temperature, and circulation throughout the complex. The malfunctioning components had caused temperature fluctuations in several administrative sections, creating conditions that the officer described as unconducive to optimal efficiency. The installation process required several hours, during which I provided technical assistance while carefully observing facility layouts and security patterns. By Imperial standards, this was a moderate security installation, focusing primarily on administrative functions rather than military operations. Nevertheless, the level of security far exceeded anything I had encountered in the mid-levels. As we completed the installation and calibration, an alert sounded throughout the facility. The technicians appeared unconcerned, continuing their work while security personnel responded with increased activity in the corridors. I forced myself to maintain a calm demeanor despite the sudden surge of adrenaline. "Routine security drill," the installation team leader explained, noticing my momentary tension. "Monthly protocol. You will be escorted back to your transport once we verify system functionality." I nodded, relieved that the alert appeared unrelated to my presence but increasingly anxious to depart. The longer I remained in an Imperial facility, the greater the risk of recognition or random security check that might detect the lightsaber concealed in my modified pocket. The verification process confirmed that the new components were functioning within specified parameters. The installation team leader signed off on the completion certificate and instructed a security droid to escort me back to the landing platform. As we moved through the corridors, I observed a group of officers gathered around a holographic display. Their conversation was muted, but I caught fragments about increased rebel activity and encrypted transmissions from somewhere in the Outer Rim. The Empire was clearly concerned about more than just a fugitive with a stolen data chip. We reached the landing platform where the transport waited, its loading cycle complete and systems ready for departure. The security droid verified my exit authorization and returned to its station within the facility. I boarded the transport with measured steps, fighting the urge to rush that might signal guilty behavior to observing security personnel. The return journey began without incident, the transport descending through security zones toward the company facility on level 904. But I had no intention of returning to my former position. This ascent had provided the opportunity I needed to approach my actual destination. As we passed level 1460, I informed the pilot that one of the starboard repulsor lift stabilizers was showing subtle harmonic fluctuations. The issue was minor but real, a deliberate miscalibration I had introduced during our stop at the Imperial facility. It required inspection before it developed into a more significant problem. "We can make it back to base," the pilot argued, checking the diagnostic readings. "Imperial protocols require immediate address of any system irregularity following service to a government facility," I countered, citing a regulation I had studied specifically for this moment. Failure to document remedial action could trigger a security audit of the entire operation. The pilot muttered something unflattering about Imperial regulations but authorized a brief maintenance stop at level 1458, the nearest commercial zone with appropriate facilities. The transport docked at a public maintenance bay, and I exited with my toolkit to address the problem. 20 minutes, the pilot called after me. "We're already behind schedule," I acknowledged, with a raised hand, walking purposefully toward the maintenance access panel where the issue would logically be located. As soon as the pilot's attention returned to the pre-flight checks for our continued descent, I slipped away from the transport bay and into the crowded commercial concourse beyond. Level 1458 was merely 2 levels above my actual target. Finding an access route downward would be relatively simple in the commercial zone, where service lifts and maintenance passages connected adjacent levels for operational efficiency. I discarded my transport company insignia, but retained the technician uniform, which would allow me to access maintenance areas without immediate challenge. Within 30 minutes, I had located a service corridor used by maintenance droids to travel between levels. By the time the transport pilot reported my unauthorized departure, I had already reached level 1456 and entered the commercial zone that contained my destination. The broken hyperdrive awaited, and with it, my best hope of contacting resistance elements who might make use of the data I carried. The establishment was located in a moderately prosperous section of the commercial district, its entrance marked by a stylized image of a hyperdrive motivator with a distinctive fracture across its housing. The symbolism seemed appropriate, a broken mechanism that enabled escape from normal space. I paused across the concourse, observing the clientele entering and exiting the facility. They represented a cross-section of mid-level Coruscant society, primarily non-humans with a scattering of humans in civilian attire. No obvious Imperial presence, though that meant little in a city where surveillance and informants were ubiquitous. After confirming that no one was paying particular attention to the establishment, I approached and entered with the casual confidence of someone with legitimate business. The interior was dimly lit and arranged in a series of curved alcoves that provided privacy without complete isolation. A central bar dominated the space, staffed by a Chagrian whose 4 horns were decorated with metallic bands bearing unfamiliar symbols. I selected an alcove with good sightlines to both the entrance and the bar, positioning myself to observe while remaining inconspicuous. A server droid approached promptly, its vocabulator producing a precisely modulated greeting. "Welcome to the broken hyperdrive. What refreshment may I provide?" I ordered the least expensive beverage on the menu, conscious of my limited remaining credits. The droid processed the transaction and departed, returning moments later with a glass containing a phosphorescent blue liquid that smelled faintly of ozone. For the next hour, I observed the patterns of the establishment. Certain clients were greeted by name, while others received subtle nods of recognition. The Chagrian bartender occasionally engaged in extended conversations with specific individuals, during which data cards would sometimes change hands with practiced discretion. The information broker aspect of the operation was apparent to anyone familiar with such arrangements. The question was how to identify those with resistance connections without exposing myself unnecessarily. Lyra had provided the location but no specific contact or recognition protocol. As I contemplated my approach, the decision was made for me. A human female slid into the seat across from me, placing a fresh glass of the blue beverage on the table. Her features were unremarkable by design, neither beautiful nor plain, the kind of face that witnesses would struggle to describe precisely. Her clothing was similarly nondescript, quality materials in muted colors that suggested resources without drawing attention. "You've been watching the room for 57 minutes, she said without preamble. "Your technician uniform is authentic, but your posture indicates military or specialized training rather than civilian maintenance background. You're carrying something in a concealed pocket that you unconsciously check approximately every 4 minutes. And you appear to be looking for someone without knowing exactly who." Her assessment was uncomfortably accurate. I maintained a neutral expression, neither confirming nor denying her observations. "The question," she continued, "is whether you represent an opportunity or a threat. Imperial agents typically display more confidence in their cover identities. You seem genuinely cautious rather than performing caution. Interesting distinction." "I'm looking for information," I said finally, keeping my voice low. I was directed here by a broker from the lower levels. Her eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of lower levels. "Most citizens below 1,000 lack the resources or clearance to reach this establishment. Your journey must have been eventful." "It began on level 1313, I replied, watching her reaction carefully. Something flickered in her eyes, recognition or interest. Few ascend from such depths. Fewer still would have reason to visit an information broker after such a remarkable journey, unless they carried something of sufficient value to justify the risk. She was probing, seeking confirmation without revealing her own affiliations. Caution was appropriate, but I had reached a point where progress required some measure of trust. "I witnessed the capture of a Jedi," I said, the words barely audible. "He entrusted me with something before the Inquisitor took him." Her expression did not change, but her posture shifted subtly, a nearly imperceptible straightening that communicated sudden alertness. Many claim connection to the Jedi. Few can substantiate such claims. I hesitated, then made a decision that could either save or condemn me. With movements shielded by the table, I partially revealed the lightsaber hilt concealed in my pocket, just enough for her to recognize its distinctive design without exposing it to broader view. She inhaled sharply, then composed herself with remarkable speed. "Finish your drink," she instructed, her tone conversational but with underlying urgency. "When you leave, turn right and proceed to public transport platform C. Board any vessel departing within the next 10 minutes. Exit at the third stop, regardless of destination. Wait near the public information terminal until contacted." Without waiting for acknowledgement, she rose and departed, moving through the crowded establishment with practiced ease until she disappeared from view. I remained seated for several minutes, processing the interaction and considering my options. Her recognition of the lightsaber had been immediate and genuine. Whether that indicated resistance connections or simply knowledge valuable to an information broker remained uncertain. Following her instructions represented continued risk, but no greater than remaining in place or attempting to find alternative contacts. I finished the beverage, left an appropriate gratuity for the server droid, and departed following the specified route. Transport Platform C serviced commercial and residential zones across several adjacent levels. I boarded a public shuttle moments before its departure, selecting a seat with good visibility of both exits. The vessel was approximately half full, the passengers displaying the weary disinterest common to commuters throughout the galaxy. At the third stop, I exited as instructed, finding myself in a commercial district specializing in technological components and communications equipment. The public information terminal was located in a central plaza surrounded by storefronts, displaying everything from personal communication devices to industrial-grade sensor arrays. I positioned myself near the terminal, maintaining awareness of security cameras and patrol patterns. Imperial presence in this sector appeared minimal, with security provided primarily by private contractors wearing corporate insignia rather than military identification. 15 minutes passed without contact. Doubt began to creep in. Had I misinterpreted the woman's instructions? Was this an elaborate trap designed to isolate me for Imperial capture? As my anxiety mounted, a maintenance worker approached the information terminal, removing an access panel to perform what appeared to be routine servicing. "The cooling system needs adjustment," the worker said without looking directly at me. "Walk with me to the supply depot to carry components." It was not a request but a continuation of the contact protocol. I fell in beside the worker, a middle-aged Mirialan whose facial tattoos had faded with time until they were barely visible against his green skin. "You have chosen a dangerous path," he said once we were beyond public surveillance coverage. "The item you carry has triggered an Imperial search priority rarely seen since the Purge itself." "I had little choice," I replied. "The Jedi chose me, not the other way around." The Mirialan led me through a series of service corridors to a storage facility filled with mechanical components and maintenance supplies. He entered an access code on a nondescript door at the rear of the facility, revealing a small room containing communications equipment and monitoring systems. "We must verify the authenticity of what you carry," he said, gesturing for me to enter. Recent Imperial operations have included planting agents with counterfeit Jedi artifacts to identify sympathizers. I hesitated at the threshold. "How do I know I can trust you?" He smiled faintly, the expression creating new patterns among his faded tattoos. "You don't, just as we don't know if we can trust you. But the lightsaber you carry belonged to Master Jocasta Nu, former chief librarian of the Jedi Temple Archives." If genuine, it represents a connection to knowledge the Empire has spent years trying to eradicate. The name meant nothing to me, but the specificity of his identification suggested legitimate knowledge of Jedi matters. I entered the room, removing the lightsaber from its hiding place and placing it on a scanner built into a workstation. The weapon itself is not what matters, I explained. It contains a data chip. The Jedi said the knowledge must survive. The Mirialan nodded, carefully disassembling the base of the hilt to extract the chip. Master Nu was one of the few who escaped the initial purge. She dedicated her remaining years to preserving Jedi knowledge from Imperial destruction. If this contains what we believe, it may be the most significant recovery since the fall of the Temple. He inserted the chip into a specialized reader, his expression growing increasingly focused as he worked through security protocols. After several minutes, he sat back, exhaling slowly. "It is authentic," he confirmed, "and far more valuable than even you likely realized. This contains coordinates to a hidden repository of Jedi teaching materials, historical records, and training methodologies. Knowledge that the Emperor has systematically attempted to erase from the galaxy. With this, the traditions might survive even if individual Jedi cannot." The significance was not lost on me, despite my limited understanding of Jedi matters. The Empire will continue hunting for it, and for me. "Yes," he agreed solemnly, "which is why you must leave Coruscant immediately. Our network can provide transportation to the Outer Rim, where connections to those who can utilize this information await. But the journey must begin now, while Imperial forces are still focused on the lower and mid-levels." "When you say network," I pressed, "you mean organized resistance to the Empire?" The Mirialan's expression revealed nothing. "Labels are dangerous in these times. Let us say that we share an interest in preserving knowledge the Empire wishes destroyed and supporting those who might one day challenge Imperial dominion." It was as close to confirmation as I was likely to receive. "What happens now?" "You will be provided with new identification, civilian clothing, and sufficient credits to maintain cover during transit. A transport leaves for the Outer Rim colonial zones within 6 hours. You will be on it, posing as a technical specialist contracted for infrastructure development." He handed me the reassembled lightsaber. "Keep this secure until final rendezvous. The contact at your destination will recognize it as authentication." Within hours, I found myself aboard an Imperial-authorized colonial transport, seated among genuine technical specialists and administrative personnel bound for recently established settlements in the Outer Rim. My new identity documents identified me as a mid-level environmental systems engineer with appropriate certifications and employment history. As the massive vessel broke atmosphere and prepared for hyperspace transition, I gazed through a viewport at the endless cityscape of Coruscant below. Somewhere down there, on level 1313, my former life continued without me. The constant struggle for survival, the brutal efficiency of the Black Sun Syndicate, the quiet desperation of those trapped in perpetual darkness. I had escaped that existence, but the path ahead held equal danger and uncertainty. The Empire's reach extended throughout known space. The data I carried represented hope for a tradition nearly extinguished, but delivering it safely to those who could use it would require continued vigilance and no small measure of luck. The ship's engines hummed as hyperspace calculations completed. Stars elongated into streaks of light as we transitioned beyond real space. I was leaving the core worlds behind, carrying knowledge that might someday help restore what the Empire had so methodically destroyed. The Jedi who had entrusted me with this burden would never know if his final act had succeeded. Master Nu, whoever she had been, had died ensuring this knowledge survived. Now that responsibility had passed to me, a former Republic mechanic who had spent a decade scavenging droid parts on level 1313. As the blue swirl of hyperspace replaced the view of Coruscant, I reflected on the strange path that had led me here. From the crushing oppression of the Undercity to a colonial transport bound for the galactic frontier, from meaningless survival to purposeful flight. from darkness toward the possibility, however faint, of light. The lightsaber rested securely in an equipment case beneath my seat, its presence a constant reminder of both danger and purpose. Whatever awaited me beyond hyperspace, I would face it carrying the legacy of a fallen order and the hope for its eventual rebirth. In a galaxy dominated by imperial shadows, perhaps that was the most meaningful resistance possible. Not grand battles or heroic confrontations, but the quiet preservation of knowledge against those who would destroy it. The protection of a spark that might, someday, reignite the light.